togetherness in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen, amen. Thank you so much, Brother Murli. And let me quickly introduce Dr. Daniel Thejus, and we call him Bobby. I had the privilege of working with Bobby for more than a few years, I should say, while we were both together at RZIM. And Bobby has been a great friend. Bobby is a thinker that I admire. I really like his personality. He's Mr. Cool, and I like his expanse of knowledge and his demeanor, the way that he carries himself. And Bobby was primarily trained, I think, in economics and politics and sociology at an undergraduate level. Then he went on to do his master's in philosophy. Quite a rarity, and that should betray that he is a thinker. And then he went on to do his doctoral work from Madras University and researched on Amartya Sen's idea of justice and identity and democracy. And then he went on and did a program, a very interesting program, an MLit in analytical and exegetical theology, from no less than St. Andrews University, Scotland. And St. Andrews is famous because many of us might know one of the very prominent faculty from there, N.T. Wright. So Bobby is somebody that has sat under the tutelage of great people. And Bobby himself is a great thinker, and his thoughts about India, Eastern mind, and all of that is very fascinating. And so we're very, very glad that he's with us this evening. He currently serves as on the team of OCRPL, which is the Oxford Center for Religion and Public Life. And Bobby and his wife, Ruhama, with their two little children, make their home in Scotland. And I think it's about 2:30 in the afternoon for him. And Bobby, thank you so much for making time for us. We are really eagerly looking forward to what you have to share with us. We have about an hour of time for you to present, and then we open up the floor for a Q&A. And feel free to do it your own style. And we're not very fixed on times and whatnot. Yeah, over to you, Bobby.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Charles. It's so nice to be in the same forum with you again after a couple of years, really. So it's nice. So thank you so much, and good to meet you all. So what I've planned to do for today's session is I'll put the PowerPoint up in a bit. Is basically sort of an introduction to Hinduism. I won't be getting into anything very complex. And if there's anyone here who perhaps is interested in something more complex, maybe we can have another session or maybe a discussion that we can take on after this, because there's so much that we can cover in Hinduism. So basically, as the title suggests, this will be Hinduism 101, and sort of just giving you an overall sort of broad picture. And so that will be more or less what I will be doing. And in terms of engagement, perhaps we can carry it forward to our Q&A session. How do we engage with
Sure.
Hindus and things like that? So that can happen there. So this is just a sort of a broad stroke of Hinduism for those of us who aren't very familiar with what it is. So I'm going to share my screen now. I hope that's up. Yeah. Is it full screen as yet?
Not yet.
Yeah, this should. Yeah. So usually a good way to begin is perhaps to ask, or maybe you can type your answers here, is what is your view of Hinduism? Maybe you can just type your opinion. Just the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word Hinduism. Okay, yeah. Yeah, people who worship many gods, Sanatan. Okay, yeah, that's the big discussion now. So great, yeah, great, yeah. This is a video, but we won't play the video. I'll just move on. Yeah, thanks. So yeah, so we have people who worship many gods, and then people who different gods, peaceful religion, uh, different gods as different power they believe. Yeah, I think more or less that's what we all think about when we think about Hinduism. Now, what I'd like to sort of begin with is who is a Hindu and what do we mean by the word Hindu? Now, the word Hindu was first used in 1828, actually, for the first time. And prior to that, it was basically people who lived across the river Indus. I'm sure many of us would have learned this in history if you paid attention to it in school. Basically, everyone who lived across the river Indus were known as Hindu. So it just became the group of people who lived across the river Indus. And in this place, there were people who believed in various different things. And it was non-creedal. And so when people came into, especially when the colonizers came into the country, they looked at all of these different various systems of thought, and they sort of gave it its name, Hinduism. Now, what was it known before? There are many different arguments. Now, that's what is perhaps happening now in India in terms of Sanatana Dharma and things like that. And the difference between North, South, the difference between the various types of Hinduisms, which we will perhaps look earlier. So basically, everyone who lived on this side of the Indus were known as Hindu. Now, I had a very interesting experience once when I was traveling from Germany to Bangalore. They served the airline company served me a meal called the Hindu meal, and I thought, okay, maybe they're giving me a vegetarian meal, and so it's called the Hindu meal. But then it was a non-vegetarian meal, and so I asked the air hostess how it's called the Hindu meal, but there is meat in it, and she said no. Basically, Hindu meant Indian for them. So anyone from this land, in their mind, was sort of known called a Hindu. So now this is a very difficult thing and sort of a very complex thing for us to sort of unpack in that sense. So there is no one version of Hindu. So we must imagine all of the people living here having different many belief systems were all now brought together, and we were called, and that belief system just was sort of carried over, and they were called Hindus. So because of that, because of this various belief systems existing in this part, it never became creedal, and so that's why it becomes very difficult for us as Christians to engage with them, because we are so used to having a creedal system, including Islam, Hindu, and Christianity. We follow a very strong creedal system, and whereas for them, there is no creed, there is no one body sort of deciding what their beliefs are. And so it's basically a non-creedal religion. And so to that extent, there are many Hinduisms. And if you were to push that argument a bit further, you can say not just many Hinduisms, you can also say every Hindu you meet is a Hinduism. You're constantly meeting people having various ideas and notions of um, what their beliefs are. So, a quick recap: who is a Hindu? It's a very complex idea to sort of unpack, but it was first used in 1828. Earlier on, people who lived across the river Indus, whoever you were, they were called sort of Hindus. And then this part of the world, there were several various belief systems, and they were all put together and given a name called Hinduism. And because they are all of this various belief system, they cannot afford to be a creedal belief, a creedal system, unlike religions like Christianity, Islam. And so you can argue that there are many Hinduisms. So in that sense, and as I said, I've pushed it further and I said every person you meet could itself be a Hinduism, and it's so diverse. And that is why I find it hard when people try to say here, especially in the world of apologetics, we're trying to come up with a system in which we can sort of engage with them. It might not normally work, because everyone you meet will be very different from the previous person you had talked to. So perhaps one successful conversation might not be a successful conversation with the next person. It might also happen within a family. Each person within the family might hold on to views that are very diverse. So in that sense, it's non-creedal and very complex. So here are a couple of popular people who have sort of tried to, of course, these are longer paragraphs and sentences. I've just summarized it as this. Who is a Hindu? Radhakrishnan, he said Hinduism is a museum of beliefs. Now that is what we just discussed, and nicely put. Different belief systems coming together, and we call it Hinduism. And then being a Hindu means being all things to all men. That's Nehru's version. Of course, he didn't have any belief. He would perhaps be branded as an atheist, but he looked at Hinduism and he said that means being all things to all men. Perhaps a line that he also picked up as a result of his Christian education in the UK. Then you have Gandhi, who said Hindus are people who believe in the Vedas, Upanishads, and other scriptures. So that's Gandhi's definition. Then you have Savarkar, who said, you are a Hindu even if you do not recognize the authority of the Vedas. So here, even within these quotes, within these popular people who, all of them have different notions of what or who a Hindu is. Now, if you ask Ambedkar, who was a Hindu at some point, who is a Hindu, he might give you a very shocking interpretation of who a Hindu is. He perhaps might have a very strong opinion against Hinduism, Ambedkar. Then if you come down to the south of India and you speak to Periyar and those people, again, if you ask who is a Hindu, they'll have their own take of Hinduism. So among Hindus, there is this diverse sort of view of who a Hindu is and what it means to be a Hindu. So basically what I'm trying to push at for us to understand is that it's not a system where you can assume that you have understood it, or because you've understood one part of it, and it might not always be the case with the next person you meet. So it is so the point that I will perhaps try to push or sort of weigh in on you is that always be sensitive to the person you are talking to, because each person might have a certain type of belief that he is sort of operating from. And so it's very crucial that you engage with the person rather than thinking that you need to respond to their views. So for instance, now let's say you are very passionate about apologetics and you have a very grand sort of argument. It might work with one person, but the other person, you might give the argument to that person, and that person might actually agree with you when it comes to that argument, and it might feel like you've perhaps not sort of gone forward in that discussion because it's that diverse. So I want to weigh that point heavily on you, that spend time getting to know them before you try to talk to them about what you believe in. So here is Shashi Tharoor in his a really popular book in which he writes why he is a Hindu. And in that, this is his quote: Hinduism asserts that all ways of belief are equally valid, and Hindus readily venerate the saints and sacred objects of other faiths. I am proud that I can honor the sanctity of other faiths without feeling I am betraying my own. Now, again, this is another view of what a Hindu is, or who a Hindu is. So this is, and I think this was also in the chat group, someone mentioned this. They are very open to other faith systems and sacred objects, and they are sort of, overall, there's this sense of dignity of treating other religions with some level of respect. So that's Shashi Tharoor. So if you speak to someone like Shashi Tharoor, this will be their opinion. But then at the same time, you might find someone who has a very different opinion of other religions, who might have a very strong opinion against other religions and other sacred objects. So that's the diversity that I want to sort of help us see. So ultimately, what happens within Hinduism is you can never be a heretic in Hinduism. In Christianity, if someone says something drastic, like say the Trinity is false, you will immediately be branded as a heretic. Or if you say Jesus is not God, you will be branded as a heretic. Whereas in Hinduism, you can say certain things and you will not be branded a heretic because it's fine for you to have that opinion. For instance, let's take the three main gods that Hindus have: Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Now, Brahma has been punished by his devotees, so he doesn't get a temple. Now, those are things that are possible within Hinduism. Whereas in Christianity and maybe Islam, or maybe to some extent in Judaism, there is a certain creed that they follow, and when you depart from that creed, you will be called a heretic. Whereas in Hinduism, that doesn't necessarily happen. Yeah. So let's take 4 prominent schools of thought. I'm just building on what Shashi Tharoor said earlier, which is Hinduism asserts that all ways of beliefs are equally valid, and Hindus readily venerate the saints and sacred objects of other faiths. I'm proud that I can honor the sanctity of other faiths without feeling I'm betraying my own. Now, here are the 4 prominent schools of thought when you think about Hinduism. One is Advaita. There are, of course, other schools of thought, but I'm not. That will just complicate it even more. But these are the 4 prominent ones that we'll just sort of briefly look at. So Advaita is basically you're looking at Shankara, and Shankara says that God has no attributes. Humans and Brahman are one, and everything is an illusion. Everything is Maya. So he takes Nirguna Brahma, that is a negative approach to God's attributes, that you can define him through negative. So God has no attributes. And then humans and Brahman, right now, the only reason you are who you are is because you've not realized that you're actually one with Brahman. The moment you realize you're one with Brahman, you overcome this illusion. And then finally, you'll realize that everything around you is Maya, and then basically you come to a realization that you are one with Brahman. Now, there are many stories that perhaps people share about Shankara. I think there's one very popular story where after Shankara gives his talk about illusion, he is walking, and then I think an animal attacks him, and then he runs up a tree. He runs and climbs up a tree, and then his disciples ask him, why is it that you're running? And if you believe that everything is an illusion, to that Shankara responds, the tiger is an illusion, and the tree is an illusion, and me climbing up the tree is also an illusion. So basically, that's his strong point, that God has no attributes. Humans and Brahman, all eventually you'll realize that you are one with Brahman, and so you will realize that the other person is not very different from you, because he or she is also Brahman, and everything is, the reason you see differences is because you are living in an illusion. So that's one school of thought. Now, very often in apologetics, this is the school of thought that they address, but that's not the majority in India. So that's just one school of thought in India. We have the next one, Visisvadaita, which is Ramanuja, which is perhaps very popular, which is as popular as Shankara's school of thought. Here, it's very different now. Ramanuja says that God has attributes. Shankara says God has no attributes. Ramanuja takes the position that God has attributes. And then humans and Brahman are different. So for Shankara, they are not different, whereas for Ramanuja, he says there is a difference between humans and Brahman. They are 2 different entities. So God becomes an entity that the human worships. The human soul can achieve identical bliss of the divine. What the human can do is that he achieves that ananda of the divine. That's how far the human goes to the divine. He can have identical bliss, the same bliss that the divine has, a human can achieve. That matter is the glory of God's body, and everything is real. So that's Ramanuja. So now these are two schools of thought, quite sort of competing schools of thought. To some extent, Shankara's disciples did not accept Ramanuja's thought process, and in certain instances, Ramanuja actually had to run to save his life from Shankara's disciples because they did not want to accept Ramanuja's point of view. So that's again there. So, and then if you sort of go looking at Shankara itself, to a large extent, Shankara was someone who was responding to Buddhism. So they're all sort of apologists for their own belief system. So Buddhism was on the rise all over India. So then Shankara comes and he emphasizes on the need for, Buddhism is basically an atheistic religion. And so Shankara comes, he gives his arguments for God's existence and that God exists and things like that, and reconverts everyone from Buddhism back to Hinduism. Then Ramanuja comes along, he goes, and then he questions Shankara's point of view, saying that how can you say that humans and Brahman are one? They're actually two different. And he pushes his idea. And many people from Shankara's school of thought come over to Ramanuja's school of thought. Shankara's disciples get angry and they sort of try to attack Ramanuja. So within India, there is this idea that all religions are sort of accepted and they get along with each other. But there is also this sort of, you can call it maybe healthy engagement within their faith system of trying to, sort of each one is sort of thinking about their faith and allowed to voice it. But among those who voice it, of course, there is a group of people who don't accept it, but others are willing to tolerate this other counter perspective. So this within Hinduism, there has always been these movements within Hinduism. Then you have Dvaita, that is Madhavacharya. Humans and Brahman are different. Some souls cannot achieve bliss and surrender. Now, Dvaita perhaps is not drastically different from Visisvadvaita, but it continues to be different from Ramanuja's philosophy, because he's saying that humans might not be able to achieve identical bliss as the divine one. And so again, you see there is this like a shift in thinking. And then finally, you have Charvaka, which is basically all that exists is matter. There is nothing beyond matter. So God doesn't exist. All that exists is matter. Now, all of this, to some extent, can be called Hinduism. So you see how sort of broad and complex and vast Hinduism is. And very often, sometimes we are tempted to sort of minimize it. And to some extent, even certain groups of people within Hinduism also are trying to sort of make it a creedal faith. And hence, there is this confusion. The whole confusion that's happening, perhaps in India, is with the Sanatana Dharma discussion, is basically this, not being able to understand or allow this sort of diversity, which has always been there within Hinduism in the past. Like we just said, Shankara, different Ramanuja, different Madhavacharya, different Charvaka. I'm not stating this. Charvaka, of course, can also precede some of these schools of thought. So that's what I mean finally at the bottom, which is it's very tough for you to be branded as a heretic within Hinduism because it is that diverse. Now, within this diversity, again, you have another thing that you have to think about: the two prominent religious strands. So on one side, you have Shaivism. On the other hand, you have Vaishnavism. As I said, the three main gods in Hinduism, if you would like to call, are Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Okay, and very often how it is taught to people as Brahma is on top, then he is the god of creation. Vishnu is the god who sort of sustains the universe, and Shiva is the god of destruction. Now, yeah, so that's one way of looking at it. But as I said, there are these two prominent religious strands: Shaivism, Vaishnavism. Shaivism are those who follow Shiva. Vaishnavism are those who follow Vishnu. Now, Shaivism Um, so Shaivism are people who are sort of devoted to Shiva, and that's another school of thought, a fascinating school of thought. Perhaps if there is another occasion, we can. My personal interest, I sort of spend a little time sort of trying to understand Shaivism and its reach, and so it has massive reach all across India. You have Shaivites who are in Kashmir, and perhaps as you come down to the south, you have this school of thought called a very prominent school of Shaivism, beginning within the south of India, and then and then slowly sort of expanding all over India. And here, Shiva is their main goal. He is their sole person that they worship. Now, within Shaivism, you can have people who are either Dvaita or Visistvadvaita. Sorry, Advaitic or Dvaitic. So again, within this one form of Shaivism, you can have again two strands, either saying that you can become one with Shiva, or you're always a devotee of Shiva, that there is a difference between you and Shiva. And so from that, you have the Bhakti movement and things like that. So that is Shaivism, a very prominent school of thought. Most people, at least there was this study that was done in India, I think 2 or 3 years ago, the Pew Research, they did this massive study, and in that they found that the majority of people in India are more or less Shaivites. So that was an interesting find that they did in the Pew Research, the one that they did a couple of years ago. Now, in Vaishnavism, the idea here is that Vishnu is the main god, but from Vishnu comes all of these different avatars. So perhaps that's I think that's what they've displayed there in that. So Vishnu has many avatars, and he visits this universe whenever there is a crucial time in the universe where God needs to enter. Vishnu enters in different avatars, and he engages with that world. Shiva doesn't have any avatars. He is beyond that. He never allows himself to be to have an avatar. He is the soul. He exists in and of himself. He doesn't need avatars. Whereas Vishnu comes in different avatars. Now there are you can the number of avatars can be as many, and within Hinduism it's a subsuming religion, and so Buddha can also be seen as someone who is an avatar of Vishnu. So I hope I've somehow managed to help you all understand how complex the system is, and it's not as simple and as easy as we are imagining it to be. Now, within Shaivism and Vaishnavism, again, they never got along with each other. Shaivite devotees will put down Vaishnavites. Vaishnavite devotees will put down Shaivites. So as I said, very often we say Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. Brahma's on top, Vishnu comes, and then Shiva comes last. Now Shaivites will reverse the order. They will say Shiva comes first, then Vishnu, then Brahman. They are both equal. Vishnu and Brahman are equals, but Shiva is above everyone else. He is the top. Vaishnavites will say Vishnu is number one, and then Shiva and Brahma follow after that. So Shiva will say it was through Shiva that these two come into existence, and they have their being because of Shiva. Vaishnavites will perhaps have a similar explanation to Shiva and Brahma. So this is sort of a broad background of what Hinduism is. So quickly, what we've done so far is we've looked at your own opinions of what Hinduism is, then how and when Hinduism, the complexity in trying to understand the word itself, who they are, who a Hindu is, how did it come to become a religion that subsumes all of the beliefs that exist in this part of the Indus. Then we looked at the different views that within Hinduism itself, the different views that people have of Hinduism. I have not quoted Ambedkar and Periyar, but they'll have their own interpretations. Then we looked at Shashi Tharoor's version of it. And then we looked at the different prominent schools, how each are so different from the other, and Within that, we are looking at the three prominent gods, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. And as I said, within Vaishnavism, within Shaivism itself, there are people who will either identify themselves as the Advaitic or Dvaitic. And then how there is so much of difference between Shiva and Vishnu. Vishnu has different avatars. And then between Shaivism and Vaishnavism, there is this discussion that's constantly happening. Who is the more important and significant god? Now, these are real discussions. These are not things that I'm just sort of saying. But if you read some of the Saivite saints or the Saivite scholars or Saivite apologists, they will speak very strongly in favor of Shaivism. Now, Shaivism is also a very apologetic sort of if you want to use the word for apologetics here, perhaps they are also very. They have a very strong sense of apologetics. Now, as I said earlier, when Buddhism was sort of on the rise in the south of India, to a large extent, because Buddhism was pushing the idea that there is no God. And so to a large extent, no God and no soul. And as I said, to a large extent, it was Shaivism who sort of combated that by offering arguments for God's existence. And some of those arguments are arguments that people like Thomas Aquinas, maybe not in its initial forms of how they give their like some four arguments for God's existence. Then you have 4 arguments for the existence of the soul. So these are things that they're going around and trying to debate with Buddhists and offering their arguments for God's existence and offering their arguments for the soul's existence to combat the Buddhist idea that there is no God and that there is no soul. So it's a sort of a lively atmosphere if you think about what was happening during that time in terms of these discussions. So that's Shaivism, Vaishnavism, and of course Brahma doesn't get a temple. As I said, he was punished. Some say by the devotees, others say by Indra. But either way, he doesn't have a temple. But I think in Thailand and elsewhere, I think there are only 2 or 3 temples in honor of him. Whereas mostly it is these two, Shaivism and Vaishnavism. So perhaps the people you most often meet will either identify as Shaivites or Vaishnavites. And that will be an interesting discussion depending on where they are. And within Shaivism, again, there are several strands, different forms of Shaivism. And so the person you meet, you'll have to figure out which strand of Shaivism they are from. And then Vaishnavism, perhaps something similar with the different avatars that they follow. And within those avatars, again, subgroups. Yeah, and so this is the broad picture of Hinduism. Now, the other aspect of Hinduism is also that it is always open to adapting and adopting beliefs. For instance, if you during the Buddhist time, there were these monks that Buddha sort of encouraged them to live as celibate monks. Then you have Buddha set up these little sanghs like mutts, and then vegetarianism was sort of influenced by Jainism. It was not always the case that vegetarianism and Hinduism to be associated as one. To a large extent, there is a good argument to say it was because of Jains that Hinduism was influenced by what Jains did, and they adopted vegetarianism. It was through Shankara's mats, to a large extent, were influenced by Buddha's Sangh, because Buddha formed these little groups and these little schools of thought wherever they went, and these monks would live in these sanghs. That influenced Shankara's mats. So all of the mats that you see to a large extent were influenced by Buddhism. Celibate monks living celibate lives, again to a large extent you can say was influenced by Buddhism. So Hinduism is open to adopting different beliefs within itself. And there is no problem. You can't sort of have an argument that this was our idea initially. For them, it doesn't matter. If it is something that can sort of merge with their belief systems, they are happy to bring it on board for them. So as I said earlier, every Hindu you meet is different. You can almost say every Hindu you meet is a Hinduism. Okay, now these are, for instance, if you look earlier in this Aryans and those theories that so you can say that they believed in a heaven and they believed in a hell, and how these ideas slowly developed, how karma slowly developed. So all the things that we are claiming, we cannot really say that these were beliefs that were held by Hindus or Indians living in this part of the Indus, were always or more or less the same, and we've managed to retain it all of these years. The same belief system has continued. It has evolved. The belief system has evolved and gone and become a sort of like a museum of belief, as Radhakrishnan says. So Aryans believed in the world of the fathers, which you can perhaps call hell, and hell, house of clay. And then slowly, belief system Dravidians believed in the concept of karma, and then that was brought, and the north and the south met, and karma was introduced, and there was a sort of a merging of ideas there. Now, you can also say Dravidians don't strictly adhere to the caste system in the sense of the 4 levels of the caste system, but what you can say is, however it is practiced in South India, the caste system, somewhere along the way, they can sort of align themselves to one of these 4 castes, the Brahmin, Vaishnava, you know, I think you all are aware of what the Vaishyas and the Shudras and out. So you can Kshatriyas, and the 4, to some extent, you can say you can sort of connect them to these 4, but it is followed very differently in the south of India. So again, you see there is so much of difference even between north and south when it comes to what do you mean by a Hindu. Festivals are also different. Holi, Diwali, Pongal, Onam, Thai, Pusam. Some of these are not even familiar with people in the north of India, what these festivals are. At the same time, earlier on, when I was little, Holi wasn't celebrated as in a very like how it is now being celebrated in South India. It wasn't the case earlier on. Now, then you have some scholars who have talked about how South Indian gods are portrayed as black and mostly having no connection with North Indian gods. So that's a certain group of scholars who have spent a lot of time distinguishing between the gods of the North and the South, black and dark, and whereas in the North they are portrayed slightly different. Then you have Ravana in the south. There's another, if you, even the Ramayana, for instance, I did a session some time ago, just focusing on the treatment of women, the role of women in the Ramayana. And there you find that even the Ramayana has so many different versions of the Ramayana. It's almost impossible for us to sort of hinge it and say this is the first original one, and from this all the others have come out. While some scholars might say there is this one thing Valmiki wrote first and from that everything else came, others might say no, it's not the case. This other version of the Ramayana could have been the first as well. So there is so in one version of the Ramayana, especially in one fringe group in South India, Ravana is considered to be a hero, whereas in the North Indian, the popular version of the Ramayana, Ravana is considered to be the villain. So it's a very complex system. Now, in this mix of all that I've shared, there is also something called popular Hinduism, which will again may not be anything close to what we've just been discussing. That will again be a very different way of expressing their belief in the different gods that they worship. So that's popular Hinduism. I won't get into that as much. So again, here is another way in which we can try to look at the 4 parts of knowledge. One is karma yoga, which is the laws of Manu. Then you have bhakti yoga, devotion. Now, karma yoga is, if you are sort of forced to trying to make these sort of connections, you can perhaps say Shankara's version of Hinduism comes very close to karma yoga, and that's the laws of Manu. That is the Sanatana Dharma, which is a fascinating discussion actually happening currently in India. Then you have Bhakti Yoga, which is devotion. Now that can be somewhere close to Madhavacharya, Ramanuja, where there is this difference between God and human. And so human spends a lot of his time focusing on his God, and the whole focus is to reflect on his or her God, and to allow his or her God to have grace on them. So very devotional. Now that can, so that's a very different type of form of worship where it is devotional. Then you have Raja Yoga, that's meditation, and then you have Jnana Yoga, which is through knowledge. So these are different pathways to knowledge and sort of trying to achieve salvation. Now, within karma, karma is basically what goes around, comes around. You do good, you receive the punishment for that. Now, there are different ways in which you can engage with that as a Christian, if there is someone who believes in karma strongly. Karma, as you know, there's this video. I'm not going to play it, but I can perhaps send it. Is doing something for God, and all of this is done with a lot of sincerity. To either you do something so that God shows favor, or you do something because you asked Him to do, God to do something, and God has done it for you, and so you acknowledge what God has done, and you do something to honor God, whatever God that He has fulfilled His promise, and you do your karma. Reincarnation, again, is you do something, and then depending on how you've lived your life, your karma, if you followed your karma and you've done it all well, you'll be reincarnated, and you'll be brought up in your status. And so the thing with reincarnation is also sort of mixed and mingled with caste. So if you are a lower caste person, and if you do good, you'll perhaps be pushed up to the next caste. So that's what reincarnation is. Now, I've had many conversations with many Hindus, and I've come across many people who, when I ask them, after you die, what will happen, many of them will appeal to the idea of heaven and hell, and not talk about reincarnation at all. But then when you push them a bit further and ask, but well, what about reincarnation? They might be, oh yeah, it's not very strict that if you meet a Hindu, he always believes in reincarnation, and it's a very strong belief, like how a Christian very firmly believes in the concept of heaven and hell. It's fluid. So yeah, he's like one person I met, like he was driving, Ola taxi driver. I was asking him what will happen to him after he dies, and his first answer was, I'll either go to heaven or go to hell. And then when I brought up the issue of reincarnation, he said, oh yeah, correct, why not, maybe that also. So there is no, you cannot corner them by having a great argument against any one of these ideas. So it's very fluid, and they're open to that. They're able to handle these contradictions, that what we call contradictions, with ease. It doesn't seem to sort of disturb or affect their belief system. Moksha is, if you have done your karma well, you are reincarnated, and then at some point when you reach the top of that ladder, you receive your moksha. You're released, and then you become, if you are a Shankara follower, you become one with the divine. If you're Ramanuja Madhvacharya, you get to be in the presence of your God. And if you're a Shaivite, again, you either be in the presence of Shiva, if you happen to believe in Dvaita, whereas if you are an Advaitist, you become one with Shiva. So all of this sort of meet and match at different levels. And then within that system, if you read the Vedas, there is this strong sense of skepticism. Now, again, if you look at North and South, in the North, perhaps there's a heavy emphasis on the Vedas, whereas as you come to the South, there is not so much of a heavy emphasis on the Vedas. Perhaps it might be one of these Shaivite saints who has written a book on the 10 prominent saints of India. So many people in the South will be more familiar with that than they might be familiar with the Vedas. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that if you talk about the Vedas, everyone will understand what you mean by it. They all will know that it exists, but they might not know what is in it. Whereas if in the South, if you talk about the Nayanas, You might find many people who are a lot more aware of these. I think there are 10 saints who have played a very crucial role in the lives of the Shaivites in the south of India. So that's, I think, am I done with my 1 hour? Yeah. So, and in the middle of all of
You still,
this,
you still
sorry,
have some
Charles?
time, Bobby. Yeah, yeah. You
I
still
still
have some time if
yeah.
you want. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so maybe in that few minutes that I have, I'll talk about Dharma as well. So while you have these three views, karma, reincarnation, and moksha, between this, there's a very important another concept which is called dharma, which is doing your duty. Now, again, that's a vast topic. Like if you are someone who is following the laws of Manu, you'll have a certain view of what the dharma is. Whereas as you trickle to the other parts, dharma will change depending on who your devotee, who your god is, and perhaps who your family. And the word dharma is quite complex, but it is a very powerful notion overall. Is what I've come to believe, that dharma plays a very crucial role in different ways. It's very difficult for us to sort of codify exactly what dharma is for all of India. Of course, if you follow the Manu Smriti and all of that, maybe it's easier for you to codify it. But that is again limited to a certain maybe geographical location or a certain group of people. Whereas if you come to other parts, that codification of dharma might not always be the case, but they have a very strong sense of dharma, and so that will be a very sort of varied approach to dharma. But that's a very important aspect. That's another thing that I have been interested in over the last couple of years, both dharma and Shaivism. And so the concept of sin in that sense will be more or less failing to do your dharma. If you don't do your dharma, that perhaps comes closest to our notion of sin, to not live life. Whereas for us, I think when we use the word sin, we are more or less talking about it in terms of our relationship with God, that I have failed to do something and hence I'm committing a sin. Whereas dharma has both implications. One is implication to society and God and to yourself. So all three are in play, are at play when you fail to do your dharma. You're not fulfilling your obligation to yourself, not fulfilling your obligation to your family, not fulfilling obligation to society, and then you're not fulfilling your obligation to God. And all of this happens when you fail to do your dharma. So it's a very profound experience. Whatever people believe about dharma, it's a very diverse word, but the experience with it is very profound for them. And so failing to do it might be the closest that we come to in terms of using the word sin. And then you have Stanley Jones was someone who sort of had he shares a story of trying to talk to a person about Jesus, and how that I think it was a couple, and then the husband kept was resisting it, and the wife, if I remember correctly, had become a follower of Jesus. And the priest, he was I think a Brahmin priest, who pointedly asked Stanley Jones if his only purpose of meeting and talking to him was so that he becomes a Christian. And that really challenged Stanley Jones, realizing how sometimes as Christians we are so keen to only talk about Jesus and not really build good, meaningful relationships with people. And then after some reflective thought, he confessed that he said, no, I think I'm interested in you as a friend rather than just you talking about, rather than me just talking to you about Jesus and for you to believe in him. And so that friendship sort of developed over a period of time. And then I think at some point, this person had failed in that sense to do his dharma. He had failed his dharma, as in he failed his responsibilities as a husband. He had failed to be a good husband to his wife, I think it had to do with having an affair with someone else. And then he had this profound experience wanting to look for forgiveness for what he had done, because he had failed his dharma. He approached his wife, and his wife, I think, said she forgave him. But even after that, he wasn't able to forgive himself, because he had not only failed his wife, his dharma with his against he had failed in his dharma with his wife, but he had failed in his dharma with himself, and of course God. But what happened was he wasn't able to reconcile what he was going to do about failing the dharma to himself. As I said earlier, dharma is something that you do for yourself, family, society, and God. So his family was willing to forgive him, but he wasn't able to forgive himself. And then when he approached Stanley Jones, when he was talking to Stanley Jones about this, it suddenly, he was actually, sorry, he wasn't talking to Stanley Jones. His wife had become a follower of Jesus, and he was surprised that his wife was willing to forgive him. And then that sort of led to his interest in finding out how to forgive himself. And that's when the meaning of and the beauty of what Jesus had done occurred to him. And he was able to experience forgiveness for the dharma that he had failed to do within himself. While he received forgiveness from his wife, but forgiveness for his own failure, he suddenly it occurred to him how Jesus can give him sort of that forgiveness, and what a difference it made to him in his life as a result of experiencing the forgiveness that Jesus gives. So with that, I think I'll close my presentation. So overall, what I've done is I've really sort of tried to at least show how complex and how vast Hinduism really is. And so from the beginning, even at its inception, in terms of who do you call a Hindu, and then how Hinduism came to be as a word, and how these different systems were pulled together and given one word, Hinduism, but it has no creed. And then we looked at the four different approaches. We have Shankara, Ramanuja, Madhvacharya, and Charvakas, all of them having very different approaches to who God is and who they are as people. And then within that, we looked at the three main gods, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, and how Brahma is sort of sidelined, but while he is important, he is sort of sidelined as well. So, but in that sort of trinitarian formation, it's Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. And then we talked about Shaivism and Vaishnavism. And within Shaivism, I said it is possible for you to be either an Advaitist or a Dvaitist. But then at the same time, Shaivites will say that the order is reversed. Shiva comes on top, and then Vishnu and Brahma come next. Vaishnavism, Shiva doesn't reincarnate. Vaishnavism, Vishnu reincarnates, and he enters into this world at different points in history to help the world find its way back to God. And within Shaivism, Vaishnavites will say they are on top, and Shiva and Brahma are under. And then between Shaivites and Vaishnavites, there's always this debate and discussion going on. And how all of them together sort of, especially Shaivism, were able to bring out arguments for God's existence and the soul's existence to counter what happened with the Buddhist sort of, as Buddhism sort of started spreading across India, they provided these arguments to counter Buddhism. And then after that, we quickly looked at these four main parts, karma, yoga, and the reincarnation. And then we also at the end looked at dharma and the important role that it plays. And then I just closed with a short anecdote. I think with that, my 101 on Hinduism ends. But thank you all so much for
Thank you.
allowing me to share my views and thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bobby. And we have a couple of questions in the chat box, and I'm going to read them to you. I hope there will be more questions that come in. I encourage people to type in questions in the chat box, because that way we can save time and we can maximize time, and then we can answer more questions perhaps than to directly speak into the mic. It takes a long time sometimes. Yeah. So Mr. Thomas Russo is asking, Bobby, Hinduism being inclusive, what possible truth questions would make a Hindu think of the need for a savior?
Yeah, as I said earlier, there is no formula that can be given. It really has to be a conversation that you have with these people, with your Hindu neighbors, friends. It's really a conversation that you sort of engage with. Like how I think Stanley Jones's example is a classic example of someone who was willing to just stand with that person, engage with them overall. But I'm sort of tempted to say Dharma actually can be one angle from which you can approach. Charles, remind me, what did he use? He used the word truth, is it? What was the word that Rousseau used?
Truth,
Thomas?
yeah, truth questions,
Yeah, truth questions.
which means absolute, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there is anything that you can sort of like what to say. Like a one truth question or two or three truth questions that you ask, uh, which will make a big impact on what they believe in. I'm sorry, Thomas, I'm not able to. I'm not convinced that I can give something like that. Of course, there are people who have attempted and talked about these truth questions, but I personally, I'm not convinced that it might happen. But if you have an example, maybe we can explore that example.
Brother Russo, do you have an example that you want to ask? Unmute and ask, please, briefly. Bobby, you were trying to say that I'm tempted to perhaps use the idea of Dharma. So, I mean,
Yeah. Yes, Charles? Or Thomas was trying to say something. Is it?
Yeah, Thomas, are you there? Brother Russo, can you give an example? Okay, I don't know if
Yes,
there's
brother. Yes,
some
yes,
audio
yes.
issue. So,
Yes, brother. Can you hear me now?
yeah, we can hear you, but can you give an example for your question? Yeah.
Whenever we talk to them, whenever we engage in a conversation, it is the intellectual Hindus who think of all that you have talked about. But when you talk to an ordinary average Hindu, he's so emotional and he doesn't understand all those things. So my question is, to an average Hindu, what are the questions that we can ask them to think of the need for savior?
Yeah, I don't think there is like a one or two like a technique that we can use, Brother Thomas.
Okay.
As far as I know, is you have to sort of walk, because I said earlier, like popular Hinduism or the average Hindu, while you might think he doesn't see the way we have structured this. I think I should have said this earlier. One is the way I think the way I have structured this is partially to some extent to see, okay, this is how I understand my belief. Now, how can I understand their belief? So, to some extent, it is modeled after how I understand my belief. What are the things that I value? And so I've modeled it in such a way. So I had a very interesting discussion with a prominent Shaivite scholar. When I was working with my previous organization, we recorded it as well. And I was asking him like the same question that you said. Now here, this is what you believe as a Shaivite. Like this is in Pondicherry. They run an institute, and in this institute, they're collecting all the old manuscripts, and it's all stored and kept safely from all over India. He's collecting all of these manuscripts. And so we are having this discussion, a fascinating discussion with him. And I asked him, see, you know all of this. To what extent does an average Hindu know what you're talking about? And he said, you'll be shocked that they actually know a lot. And I asked, okay, so from where are they getting this ideas? Like, is there like for me, where do I get my ideas of theology? I go to a Bible college, go to a theological institution, and that is where I get it from. And so I asked him, so where do they get it from? And he said it is the the priest in the temple. So I didn't. It never occurred to me that the priest played such a crucial role in the belief system of the people who visit the temple. And then, so in my assumption, I felt that this professor, not the professor, the scholar who I had met, perhaps knows more than the priest. So I asked him that question again. So he immediately took the position that I am only an ounce of how much the priest actually knows. And here is the scholar sort of saying that I only know just this. He showed his finger like this. This is all I know compared to what the priest knows in the temple. And what happens is the priest, the way they transfer information is not like how we would say. We go to a church and then we spend we have all of these things that we do. So fairly a Christian will have some kind of understanding of what is being talked about. Whereas them, I think it's done in different patches. They have, like for instance, let's say Shaivism. They have regular temple talks that are given, and anecdotes basically. And so much of the information that a popular Hindu will have on his belief will be anecdotes, but those anecdotes will play a crucial role. So there might be a priest who has one evening where he'll just talk, he'll just pick up one concept from the Ramayana and he'll talk about it. And then you have these songs that are sung, and at homes these stories are told. So one is a popular Hindu actually might know a lot more than what we think they know, or will know enough for his belief to be sustained. He might not be able to talk about his belief like how we structure it, but however he has structured it in his mind, that is enough to sustain him. Now, how do you reach out to this person is that you have to first enter into his thought process. Now, very often what we are doing is we are approaching it like how we approach our belief system. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is what it is. This is what it is. Whereas for them, it is not like that. And so, while you might say the average Hindu hasn't structured it like this, you're right in saying it, but they have structured it in another way, which we need to understand. It is structured in some form or the other, but not structured like how we have structured it. So part of your task is to sort of enter into that structure and find out how it is that they have structured their belief system. And then as you talk to them and as you get to know them, you will sort of know what it is that you need to bring up. So the idea of having set things that will work might not always work, because these structures will vary from person to person. So part of our task is really to understand how they have structured it. And they have done it. I've had, like I said, I've had fascinating conversations with all sorts of people trying to understand how they have structured their belief systems. And you'll be quite surprised actually how they have structured it. And once you've understood that structure, you must be able to think, how do I offer hope to this person? Our task is not really to convert people, correct? Jesus is not interested in that, just converting people for the sake of converting people. And I'm sure all of us would agree on that. Our task really is to bring hope to people. And so as you talk to them, I'm sure you'll find a lot of scope to see how you can bring hope and the love of God to these people. And that is perhaps the story that I shared from Stanley Jones. So enter that structure, find out what that structure is, and enter that structure. And so to some extent, you will have to not think how you think now as a Christian in those structures. So I think that's perhaps the way I've engaged with people. Yeah, so that's where I stand, Brother Thomas. Yeah.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. There's another question, and Mr. Varghese Nainan is asking, is there a gospel of Hinduism? And if so, what is it?
That's nice. Yeah, so there is no, to start, I don't think there is like this, a gospel of Hinduism. But what might happen is you might find like within these strands, right? Like these different strands that I was talking about, let's say in Shaivism, you might find a guru, and the guru sort of becomes, you can maybe come close to the guru's thoughts, the guru's views might become the gospel for that person, where he sort of, and these gurus also to a large extent will align themselves to either Shaivism or Vaishnavism. And within that strand, they will say, I'm this type of a Shaivite, and or they will create a new strand themselves in Shaivism. And so mostly you can put them into these two categories. And so to a large extent, a Hindu more or less experiences his faith through the guru that he sort of follows. So gurus actually play a very tremendous role, especially in Shaivism, at least I can say for sure, they play a big role. In fact, because you can never encounter Shiva. Shiva will never reveal himself entirely to you. And the only way you sort of encounter Shiva is through your guru. And so perhaps when you're, the gospel might be for them the particular guru that they are following and what that guru is teaching them about either Shaivism or Vaishnavism. And they will sort of experience their belief through that guru. So maybe that comes closest to our idea of a gospel, what the guru has said. And those, there are many. Perhaps the most prominent Shaivite guru is the person in Coimbatore,
Jaggi Vasudeva.
Jaggi Vasudeva. So perhaps those who follow him will follow him closely and what he says. So that might become their gospel. But again, Jaggi is a devotee of Shiva, and from a certain strand within Shaivism that he follows. Yeah, so maybe that's the closest, but that's a fascinating question. But there is within Shaivism, I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot because that's an interest of mine, where they have tried to sort of limit it to the Nayanas, if you read about them, a lot of their stories. And so how those Shaivites experience Shaivism is by reflecting on the stories of these people, on how they live their life. So it might not be creedal, but it might be in the form of a story. So how did this certain Nayanar, a saint, experience the faith? And so that story will be what is communicated to them through the story of that person's life and how he lived out his faith. And to some extent, these people will, their devotees will try to emulate that type of living, depending on that particular saint who is being talked about. And like in villages and things like that, they'll have these people who come with an instrument, and they'll sit in the temple corner and they'll play that instrument and sing those songs. And these, very often the songs will be in honor of these those 10 saints that I'm talking about. And people will experience the faith through the lives of those saints. So this is what that saint did. And so that might be a model after which they might try to live their life, or something that they think about during the day or whenever. Yeah. So that might come closest to the gospel in that sense, to our notion of what the gospel is. But there is no clear, I think we won't get anywhere if we want to find something like that. The exact replica of or a similar experience as how we experience the gospel. Yeah.
Hey, Bobby. There's another one, again by Brother Varghese Nainen, and he's asking, can you elaborate on Sanatana Dharma? That's something that is very relevant, and that's there's a lot of talk and discussion about that.
Yeah, so that's really a very complex idea, and it is, the other problem with it is it's also meshed with a lot of political. It's become a political issue also. Now, the Sanatana Dharma, while like some people will argue that is what Hinduism. The Hinduism doesn't exist. There is no such thing as Hinduism. What exists is the Sanatana Dharma. Now, the moment you use that, I'm sure you all are following the argument. There are several things that come into play. For instance, uh, okay, so Sanatana Dharma has its own history. And in that history, you have someone like Manu, who talks about the Sanatana Dharma. Now, in Manu's Sanatana Dharma, in his version of the Sanatana Dharma, if you want to say that is what Sanatana Dharma is, it is heavily caste-based. So each caste has its own Dharma, and you have to follow the Dharma of your caste. So if you're a Brahmin, you follow the Dharma of a Brahmin. If you're a Kshatriya, you follow the Dharma of a Kshatriya. And if you fail to do your Dharma as that, that's basically failing to act responsibly in the world. So immediately when you bring that up, then you have, in that Dharma, you have those caste issues. So if you're a lower caste, your Dharma is this, and you cannot do the Dharma of the previous caste. You cannot perform the Dharma of what the better caste or the caste above you does. If you're a woman, you have your Dharma that you have to follow. And if you cross that, you are failing to do your duty. And that will have repercussions. And these repercussions are cosmic repercussions, not just some personal thing that you have done. Like I said, it has cosmic repercussions in Manu's terms. So if you are approaching it from there, then immediately what will happen is women today, many of them are failing to do their Stri Dharma by the standards of what perhaps Manu envisaged what a woman should be doing. So you'll find many women will sort of rebel against, will be failing to do what Manu said. Then if you have caste system, and people who are trying to rise above the caste system and who achieved great things, even if they are lower caste people, they are failing to do their Dharma as a Shudra. Let's say a Shudra, if he has a Dharma, and now if he is a very successful person, he's perhaps, many of the things that he's doing, perhaps he's failing to do the Dharma of what his original caste was meant for him to do. So now that is what I think this whole political debate is all about, with what this the Tamil Nadu minister has said. Sort of he has attacked Sanatana Dharma from I think purely looking at it from the caste perspective, because he comes from a tradition where you all might be aware of this social reformer Periyar. And so Periyar now sort of he disregarded the caste system, and so for him the Sanatana Dharma doesn't hold good. But then as you come actually to the south, not many people are even familiar with the Sanatana Dharma. As I said earlier, they might be a lot more familiar with these 10 saints, the Nayanars. I'm not sure about the exact numbers. It could be 10 or more, or maybe more by a few or less by a few. They might be more familiar with what these Nayamas have done and how they've lived out their life. And so Dharma then will be an extension of listening to what these saints have done and trying to live out what those saints have done. And maybe people have forgotten these saints, and maybe they might not remember it, but it has continued from one generation to the other, people saying we need to live in a certain way because it was modeled after a certain saint. They might not remember the saint, they might not be able to associate a certain action with that saint, but they are following it, what these saints have done, and they will model their life. So it's more, these Nayanas might be more popular in the south of India rather than Sanatana Dharma. And even if I'm not mistaken, Sanatana Dharma did not play a very crucial role in the history of Hinduism. Also, it emerged slowly and then became a very prominent part of their belief system. So you can't say it has pan-Indian reach now. So when let's say the government talks about the Sanatana Dharma, and certain people in certain circles are very angry that someone has tried to put down Sanatana Dharma and sort of equating Sanatana Dharma with Hinduism. They might be at fault because there are people who are not aware of this at all, that Sanatana Dharma exists, and yet they are also equally Hindu. Then we'll have to ask the next question is, which parts of the Sanatana Dharma are we meant to follow? Because there are so many women who are not doing what Sri Dharma should perhaps be doing. There are so many lower caste people who have risen above and who are achieving things and doing things, which perhaps, very strictly speaking, that particular Dharma of that particular class might not be allowed to do. So, so maybe what might happen at some point, if there is a pushback from the Hindu community, it might be to ask people who are making a noise about this issue, to ask, what is it, or can we come out with a code and say, okay, this is for today's world, this is what Sanatana Dharma is going to look like. I think that if this argument is pushed to a large extent, maybe people might ask for a new version of what the Dharma, Sanatana Dharma is. Either a new version, or for the people to be given, this is what, for this time, this is what Sanatana Dharma is going to look like. Now, all of this is sort of mixed with politics, belief, and so it becomes a very sensitive issue. And so that maybe that is how perhaps I would approach this whole thing. And it's not just in South India you have Periyar, but then you also have Basava in Karnataka. So that's why I think right after this man said it in Karnataka, someone else spoke about it again, because Basava played a very crucial role in Karnataka, and he took a stance which is anti-caste again. And the Lingayats, that movement sort of became very popular. But even if you didn't become a Lingayat, the trickle effect of Basava is sort of felt all over Karnataka at different levels. So and so that's why you find that immediately after that, because you have Periyar in Tamil Nadu, you have Basava in Karnataka, both had similar approaches there. So it doesn't necessarily mean that these people who are talking against Sanatana Dharma are against Hinduism. Maybe that's the political angle to what is happening there. But I don't think that is what these people are saying, because if you genuinely look at, I'm sorry to talk about politics here, within the DMK, of course, it has atheistic formation, it has atheistic roots, but they have not attacked religion in the sense that you cannot be a Hindu and be a part of the DMK party. You can be a Hindu, but as a party, there's a philosophy that they have, and that philosophy is against certain things that perhaps certain Hindus hold as very important to them. But to speak against Sanatana Dharma doesn't equate that you are speaking against Hinduism. Because what will you make of Basava then, who was a very devout Hindu? He at least defined what in terms of how he practiced his faith. We would normally call that a Hindu. So you cannot. I think that equation is perhaps done for other reasons. So it's highly possible that you can still be a devout Hindu and still have your reservations about certain aspects of how Manu at least expressed what Sanatana Dharma is. So it's a very complex, that whole word is quite complex. Yeah. But that's a good question. Okay. And I think that conversation is just going to be evolving, but it's going to be a very interesting thing to see how it evolves. It'll be really nice to see how that conversation goes.
Right. Thank you, Bobby. And we have another question from MG. He's asking, the Hindu elders say that Jesus was the messenger of Krishna. He came to preach about Krishna, and others say Jesus was the disciple of Buddha. How to respond to these types of questions from our non-Christian friends?
Yeah, I think see, these are questions that you will perhaps encounter a lot, especially among those who have perhaps read Jesus Was in India and things like that. One immediate thing for us to, like this book, Jesus Was in India, if that was perhaps the popular book that sort of gave the idea that Jesus came to India and he spent some time in a monastery and then went back, taking the ideas of Buddha back to um, to Palestine. Now, one is, of course, if you look at the evolution of religion, it has you will find that there were exchange of ideas happening at different points, that views from here have gone there, views from there have gone, just like how humans traveled, ideas also of different religions traveled, and people adopted them and followed them without really knowing where it was coming from. It's impossible to sort of pinpoint and say this is where it came from. So one, you can approach it like that. The second thing you can say is this whole idea that Jesus came to India and he lived in a monastery and he encountered Buddhism. The timing doesn't match that. If you read that book carefully, the timing of when Jesus came and when Buddhism reached that part of the monastery that they claimed that Jesus was at, the timing is that Buddhism hadn't yet reached that part of India as yet. It hadn't yet come there. It came much later. I think several years later or decades later, Buddhism went to that place where they claim Jesus encountered Buddhism in that monastery. That monastery came many years later. So that's perhaps the second response. But the final response, which is perhaps for me very crucial, is that one is we need to see how people around Jesus viewed him, and what does Jesus himself say about himself. Not what someone in India thinks Jesus is, or not what someone in another part of the world thinks that Jesus is. We need to perhaps approach Jesus himself and ask him who he thinks he is. And from that, and from his friends, people who are closest to him, to ask them what do they think who Jesus is. And when we approach the Gospels with that lens, asking the question, who does Jesus think he is, and how do his friends view him? Then you get a completely different picture from the mouth of the person himself, saying who he is and his views. And then when you listen to what Jesus says about life after death and things like that, it doesn't square well with the idea of reincarnation. Nor does it square well with him being an avatar. When you listen to how he talks about himself, it doesn't fit into those categories of how they are sort of interpreting it. So he identifies himself with the Father. He says, "I and the Father are one." And his death and his resurrection and the power that it brings and the hope that it brought to his disciples sort of tell a very different story from how that Jesus was Krishna reincarnated. So that's so perhaps we need to come and ask him who he is, and then look at how he has talked about himself. And when you listen to that, I think that becomes the final deciding factor, that he doesn't seem to see himself as any of those things, and neither does what he teach square with those views of how they are viewing it. So I think that's how I would approach it. So those three things. One is ideas, of course, have been traveling from place to place. Secondly, Jesus, the time that he visited this monastery somewhere in the north of somewhere near Tibet, that part where this book claims that Jesus visited and lived and learned, Buddhism hadn't reached that place. There was still animus at that point. If Jesus went there, he perhaps interacted with animus, and Buddhism came much later to that place where that monastery is, and so that beats it. Second thing is, we need to ask Jesus who he is, and ask his friends who they thought Jesus was. And then when you read the Gospels, it doesn't square with the views that you sort of just brought up. Yeah.
Thank you, Bobby. We have a few more questions. It's about 8:57. So all those that need to leave at 9, please feel free to do so. And Bobby, if you if you would couple of questions, or do let us know when you need to go. Good question that I think Alroy is asking. He's saying if there is tolerance and respect and assimilation and syncretism, in Hinduism, why is there Christian persecution by the Hindus?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, it's okay. But in the majority sense, in sort of overall view, you can say there is tolerance. Like I said earlier, even within this Hinduism, when Shankara was sort of talking about when he was propounding his ideas of what Hinduism was in response to Buddhism, it was sort of a response to Buddhism, saying so there is syncretism to a certain extent. They're not saying we accept everything. So that is the reason why they are responding to Buddhism, a strong response. So are you able to hear?
Yes.
Yeah. So so while you say
Yes, we can
syncretism,
hear you,
I
Bobby.
think,
Go on. Yeah.
okay, yeah. So while we say syncretism, I think it needs to be qualified that it is not just blindly accepting everything. It's sort of what can be accepted is accepted. What cannot be accepted is sort of thrown out. Like Buddhism is an attack on the Vedas, and then you have Sankara coming and reinstating the Vedas again and pushing Buddhism out, but yet at the same time adopting things like like the importance of vegetarianism or the importance of these mats. So they adopt certain things, but not everything. Then you have Ramanuja again coming, and as I said earlier, in some certain instances, his disciples and him had to sort of run for their lives because Shankara's disciples were not willing to accept Ramanuja's teachings. So it's a complex relation.
Would it be sorry, Bobby, would it be fair then to say that they are partially tolerant than to say that they are fully tolerant to the
It might be
question of
fair to say
Christian persecution?
Correct. Yeah, so it might be fair to say that they're willing to accept certain things, but maybe not willing to accept everything that a person believes in. So syncretism also, maybe it has its limits in terms of, so I think they are willing to accept it. But then when it comes to Christian violence, also, I think that becomes both political and also sort of not just political, but also the sense of losing control, right? And that can be a reason for why the violence also exists. That could be one. That could be another reason. Another reason can also be perhaps the way in which we talk about in certain instances. That can also be a reason as to how we present our faith to others. Some of us, maybe some people do it very aggressively, or some people have a tendency to put down or demean a belief system in order for someone to appreciate your system. Now, that might not be the best way to do it either. You don't have to put down someone in order for them to see that you're better. It might work with certain people. It might work with perhaps Islam, if you were able, but I don't think it works very well here. And so it's a complex thing.
Right.
I don't think we can put our finger and say this is one reason why Christians are persecuted. I think it's a blend of all of these ideas. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very quickly, Bobby, there's another interesting question on the idea of karma vis-a-vis the idea of what you reap is what you sow in the Bible also. So how do we look at those? How do we synthesize those? What you reap is what you sow, from the Bible and the idea of karma.
Yeah, what you reap and what you sow is a very ancient idea. Also, it says it seems to be, it seems to have some kind of weight across different religions and across time. So, but I think every
Mm-hmm.
sort of faith system has understood it in maybe similar and different ways depending on how you want to see it. Now, for in Christianity, it is what you reap is what you sow is perhaps here. What you reap here is what you will sow in your life immediately. That is one view. And then, of course, there is also what you reap here is what you will sow. What you sow here is what you will reap in the afterlife. For Hinduism, what you reap again is what you will sow here. They believe it will also affect you right now, but it also affects in terms of your rebirth. If you follow Manu's version of Dharma, if you've done something bad as an upper caste, you will now be brought, depending on the nature of what you've done or the significance of what you've done, you'll be brought down below. And you might be born lower caste or an animal or a woman or something like that. And so that has implications in terms of you coming back, being reincarnated. Whereas in Christianity, what you reap, what you sow is what you will reap, comes also with Christ's forgiveness. For instance, if you take the woman who was about to be stoned, perhaps by Old Testament law, she is reaping what she has sown. Yeah, if you have to extend that argument, she was found doing something that was not right, and she was reaping that. But then we find that Jesus has the ability to sort of break that cycle, and he offers forgiveness. He brings hope to this person. He offers grace, offers her hope, and she, to some extent, is born again. So you experience this rebirth not in the afterlife, but you experience rebirth here and now. So when Jesus says you will be born again, it really means that you are given a second chance in life, and that's what that lady experienced. You don't have to die and then figure it out later on. You're born again right now. You can experience a sort of new life right now, and it's a tremendous hope for people who are perhaps contemplating even things like suicide, hoping that this life will end, maybe the next life will be better. Jesus is saying, right now, I can make a transformation in your life. You can be born again right now. You don't have to kill yourself to be born again, or you don't have to quit you right away. And it's just tremendous. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yes. Thank you for that, Bobby. And there's a question on the Hindu stories, the epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata. What about their historicity? Are they rooted in history?
Correct. Yeah, that's see, the thing is, this question occurred to me, yeah, and what I find, now the thing is, among Hindu scholars themselves, you'll find a range of people. One group of people will say that Rama is a historical figure. He really existed, and hence they have these places where Rama might have been, or Ram Janma, the temple is his birthplace. Now that is one group of people who try to trace his history. But then what I found very fascinating is there are many people, a lot more people, who it doesn't really matter to them actually whether Rama was a historical figure or not. Now that is actually the most fascinating thing for me personally, that now if you meet someone like this and you bring out the argument that how the Ramayana and the Mahabharata are just stories, they don't have any historical thing, for that person it doesn't matter at all actually when you bring that up for him to him, because he's entirely happy and fine with the idea that it is not a piece of history, because for him what happens is he finds value in the story rather than in its historicity, and the story gives him value. And so that's why in the like I said earlier, the Ramayana has so many different variations. And it doesn't matter to them. Like if you say, how can the Ramayana, one Ramayana is like this, one Ramayana, that's a problem primarily for Christians and Muslims, I think. So that's what I'm saying. When you take your structure and try to superimpose it on this structure here, it might not be successful in that sense. So for us, it matters. the historicity of the Bible and the historicity of Jesus. And so we are thinking, okay, now because it matters to us, this should also matter to them. And for them, it really doesn't matter. They're completely fine with the idea that Rama, perhaps it doesn't even occur to them to think whether he existed or didn't exist, because the story is more powerful than the historicity of this person. So it really depends who you're talking to. So if you're talking to someone who believes in the historicity of Rama, then it might be a very interesting conversation. And it might be interesting for you to engage. So that might be very similar to what you believe in terms of historicity. You're perhaps using critical there's a technical word for this when they study history. There is the word critical in it, but I don't know what the following word is. But then you can perhaps use those tools to compare how that particular the critical theory applies to the Gospels and how critical theory applies to the Ramayana. But you need to find someone who believes that the Ramayana is a historical thing. Then you can sort of engage as equals. But then when you meet the other person who doesn't really, these are people, like I'm saying, Ramanujan. Ramanujan is a very great scholar. He taught, I don't know the name of the university, but he's a great thinker. For him, it doesn't matter if Rama really exists or not. But he's a man of deep faith, a very intelligent man. But for him, it doesn't really matter if Rama really existed or not, because the story is bigger for them. So it really should be something that you engage with the person depending on who they are, and then when you're talking to them about that, if that is their belief system, and if it doesn't matter if Rama is a historical figure and the story is more important, perhaps that's the line that you need to perhaps take when you're talking to them, working towards working on
so it means that the principle is more important than the person.
Correct. Because anyway, see, Rama is not going to bring them salvation. Rama's sort of a king who exemplifies human values. Rama is someone. If you read Rama, he's what is it? There is a word like the ultimate human, the ultimate man. And so that is more important for them rather than if he existed. So here is a person who has these characteristics, and this is what a human should look like, or this is how a human should be. He is pure, he is virtuous, he is all that what a human should actually represent. And so that is more important for them. Correct, Charles. So that principle of who Rama is and what he achieves becomes more important. Now, if you want to engage in a sort of discussion, you might be like, but then why did Rama treat Sita like that? Did he not know that Sita was pure and that she hadn't? Now, those are discussions that you'll have to take. But I think that it's better to go in the direction of where they are going and try to see what you can draw.
Right. Got it.
And bring and see how Jesus sort of encounters these ideas. Yeah.
Sure. Bobby, how are you on time? It's 9:10. Are you okay to take another question or two?
Yeah,
or
for me,
it's
not night, so it's fine. Yeah.
Okay. So Ren Lamo is asking something very interesting. He has observed a Vaishnava page on Facebook highlighted the unifying role of having a creed in Christianity and Islam, and suggested the idea of forming a creed unifying the diverse strands of Hinduism, that a possible development within Hinduism, can we anticipate this in the near future? This is from a Vaishnava page on Facebook.
Oh, yeah, that's quite interesting. It might be interesting to see that, but they might, the high, like for Shaivism, there is some sort of not a creedal thing, but a certain group called Shaiva Siddhanta. In Shaiva Siddhanta, you can almost sort of, it's like the final say on Shiva. Like these people got together and they formed this group called Shaiva Siddhanta, which is quite structured in one way. You can sort of engage with it. It's nicely structured as to what they believe in, who God is, who is Shiva, arguments for God's existence, arguments for the soul, and how do you practice your faith, how do you practice your belief. It's all and it is not very dependent on the Vedas. They put the Shaiva Siddhanta texts on par with the Vedas, but they might not be willing to accept that it was from the Vedas that this came, the Shaiva Siddhanta, this particular school in Shaivism, Shaiva Siddhanta. They might not accept it. They'll say it is on par. So it has happened to some extent in Shaivism. In Vaishnavism, again, I've not my interest was more on Shaivism, but I won't be surprised if Vaishnavism attempts it, but it will be far more complex for them because of the avatars.
Because of the avatars, yeah.
Because of the avatars, it might be slightly more complex to come up with something like that. But there is a lot of push. I've read many articles for even Rabindranath Tagore made the argument that somewhere where Hindus are failing in sort of competing with Muslims and Hindus is because we don't all believe in the same thing. But I'm not sure he said that in a negative way or in a positive way, because there are people who see this diversity itself as a very positive thing. But he wrote very briefly on that idea that it might be good if there are things that we believe in a unified way. So there might be a push, and I think even this whole discussion around the Sanatana Dharma, many people are pushing for something like that, a codified, a pan idea of what Hinduism. But that will be a very difficult thing, because immediately issues like caste and things like that also might prop up. So it'll be interesting though. But the thing is, in Hinduism, these sort of movements have come, and they sort of add value to to what is happening in India. So I'll be really interested to see what comes out of that discussion. Yeah, it's quite a nice, interesting project.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Bobby, for that. One more question. Some Hindus from Alroy, some Hindus encounter their gods through mantra and japas, repeatedly repeating mantras and bhakti and all of that. So his question is, can Hindus come to faith through apologetics or polemics, or only through a personal encounter with Jesus?
That's the great question. So again, as I said earlier, it is depending on who you are talking to, trying to understand who they are, getting to know them, genuinely being interested in their life, not with this ulterior purpose of getting at them, but you're genuinely interested in their well-being, and you really feel that Jesus can bring them hope. I think that's the best way possible. But very often, I think most stories we've heard is through a personal encounter, either through healing or through some sort of a personal encounter with Jesus, an answer to prayer, or even sometimes just staring at the crucifix. I've heard stories of people being drawn to the personality of Jesus by just staring at the cross. And so something that moves them. And so you're right. I think it is very often through an encounter with Jesus, and hopefully that encounter can happen through our own lifestyle and our behavior. And I think there is scope for that as well. So I think the way we live out our faith also can have a bearing on how they encounter Jesus.
Absolutely. Yes, I think I have asked most of the questions. If there's anyone that has a question that you asked and I haven't been able to locate that and ask Bobby, feel free to unmute your mic and ask him. Okay, I don't think there's anybody, Bobby, but it's been an amazing, nearly 2 hours. Thank you so much for all the value that you brought to Winsome Wednesdays on a Friday night. And Yes, and as always, it was very fascinating to listen to you and the way you think and process things through. And we hope to have you sometime in the future. I think we've merely scratched the surface. I feel already too overwhelmed and dizzy, and maybe we should talk more on this. And I think we had a very extensive Q&A session. We at least did about 10 questions, and all your perspectives have been very, very helpful, Bobby. And thank you so much for agreeing to do this for us. And let me ask Aditya if he is there to close with a word of prayer. Yeah. Are you there, Aditya?
Yeah.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes,
Yeah.
you are.
Yeah. Thank you to Bobby for this session. Let's pray and close. Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you and praise you, Lord, for this time which you gave us to study. Lord, especially, Lord, we have learned a lot of things, a lot of terms, and Lord, we are surrounded by the Hindu traditions and Hindu culture, Lord. And thank you, Lord, for giving us the insight about their beliefs and their thoughts and how they think. Father, Lord, I pray that, Lord, help us to understand more and help us to be a witness towards them, Lord. I pray that, Lord, you might give the grace and wisdom that is required. And I also thank you, Lord, for all the people who have taken the time and joined to learn, Lord. I pray that, Lord, you bless them and give the wisdom that is required. And I also thank you, Lord, for Brother Bobby who took this session today. I thank you, Lord, the way he presented, the way he thinks and process the things, and he brought us today, Lord. We thank you and praise you for all the things which he has taught us, Lord. And we also thank you and praise you for the Winsome Wednesday, which is you have been so graciously leading week after week, Lord Father. We commit ourselves into your hands. We commit the session into your hands, and help us to use this what we learned in our life to evangelize our Hindu Father. We give you all the glory, honor, and praises to you in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Aditya. And Bobby, again, thank you so very much. The next week also, we have something on Hinduism. LT Jayachandran Uncle will be speaking on the shades of Hinduism. And the following week also, we're planning to have somebody from the Hindu faith that's become a Christian. And we're going to have a little bit of an interview with them about how Christ impacted them and what brought them to the faith. So thank you so much, Bobby, for agreeing to do this.
Thank you, Charles, so much.
We will we'll get in touch with you for more, if you don't mind. Yeah.
No problem. Really lovely work. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Okay.
Have a lovely
Bye.
weekend.
Good night. Good night,
Bye.
everyone. Good night.